Daniel Harris, good morning to you.
Hello.
We could all do with a bit more Roy Keane in us, I suspect.
Absolutely, yeah. We could all do with knowing Roy Keane, being Roy Keane, all of those things.
Yeah, certain aspects of Roy Keane, I think it might be fair enough to say. But not an unreasonable point that, like, De Bruyne at his best, obviously, we've seen can be and is one of the finest footballers on the planet, but just missing a bit of that, I suppose aggression is probably the short word for it.
I'm not sure about that. I think there are different kinds of aggression, and Roy Keane had the kind of the traditional proper football man aggression, but the way that De Bruyne plays football is also with aggression. And I think in the end, he's just a different kind of personality to Roy Keane, and you see the way his different personality in the way that he plays. He's more of an artist than Roy Keane, and I don't know if you gave Kevin De Bruyne Roy Keane's personality, whether you necessarily see the same player or the Kevin De Bruyne that we see with Roy Keane's aggression. You might just see a whole different thing. You might lose some of the artistry. I don't know.
Yeah, it's also like, for De Bruyne's point of view, like he's 29 a bit later in the year. Like, this is not a player that is necessarily going to transform his personality at this stage of his career.
No, I'd say that seems unlikely, and he is already and has been for years. I know people like to say that it was Eden Hazard till he moved to Madrid, but as far as I'm concerned, De Bruyne's been the best player in the Premier League for quite a few years now, and definitely, if I was allowed to sign one player, it would be him.
Yeah. Right, the Manchester United with the Europa League last night, Daniel, the Solskjaer revolution gaining momentum was one newspaper headline I saw this morning, so you probably know where I'm going with this, but 10-man Club Brugge side last night, who in itself, they were down to probably not quite a second string, but certainly headed in that direction. Is revolution a bit too strong this morning?
I'd say revolution's not just that it's too strong, it's probably the wrong word, in that what we're seeing has been evolution, not revolution, because it's been quite gradual. He took over, and since he took over, he's got rid of players that he didn't want and got some players that he did want, and slowly we're seeing some improvements. And I think I've been on here more or less since the beginning, and even since before he was fired, since before Mourinho was fired, saying that if you gave this United team a decent midfield, then you'd see a much better team. And that's what's happened, because he's obviously signed Bruno Fernandes, and it's quite terrifying to think that had McTominay and Rashford not got injured when they did, United probably wouldn't have signed him, when he's clearly a player that they should have signed in the summer, or at least at the beginning of January, never mind panic bought towards the end of the window.
Yeah.
But you're seeing Fernandes, and now they've got McTominay back, and they've also got Fred in the team, and those three, they're not the greatest midfield that United have ever had, but they are, you can call them a midfield without feeling embarrassed at what you're saying. And that's making an enormous difference. And Fernandes just looks a lot like the right player at the right time. And he's doing what Pogba was meant to do, in that he's not only playing well himself, but he's elevating the standards of the players around him.
Yeah, like you're saying, effectively, that they've bumbled their way to a degree into this. Strategy seems like it might be a stretch, but in terms of the reasons that they're here, it wasn't quite by design, other than desperation to some degree.
I'm not sure that Solskjaer has bumbled his way to this point, in that I'm pretty sure he wanted more players than he was given in the summer, and a guy who played in front of Beckham, Scholes, Giggs and Keane, the greatest midfield that English football has ever seen. I don't think that he previously thought the midfield that he had was adequate. I just think that he was given limited funds and spent them in other areas. The board, on the other hand, have absolutely bumbled their way to this point, but we got there in the end. And what United need to do now is, rather than sit there looking in the mirror, admiring the work that they've done, which Ed Woodward strikes us all as the person who will do that, they need more players of Fernandes's quality, not just to sit there being pleased that they've got him. Because ultimately, and you saw this with Pogba too, if you're a team playing United, you will be thinking, if we stop Bruno Fernandes, then more or less we stop United. And that's not entirely true, but it's also not far from the truth. And what United need to do now is, in the summer, sign another attacking midfield player to play with Fernandes, and then you'll start to see a proper team developing.
Yeah, you say there we got there in the end. Like, it does strike me that it's continually obviously a work in progress from a Manchester United point of view. There might be a temptation over the coming weeks, if we see much more of this revolution, as it's termed, or domination at least anyway, that Manchester United, the powers that be, feel perfectly happy that actually if the season was to begin tomorrow, we're in pretty good shape to contend for the title. Still not the case though yet, Daniel, I suspect.
No, I don't think they'll be thinking that at this point. I think that they might, if United manage to finish fourth this season, or then there's a fair chance the board might think, well, there's no need to get too excited in the transfer market because finishing fourth with this injury list would be quite good. So you would expect to have better luck with injuries next season and not finish fourth. But if Paul Pogba goes, then United will have a decent wedge to spend without actually investing any money. So, and it's quite easy now to see the team developing and to see what they need to do to strengthen. And I would say that if United are able to find the money in the summer for a right winger, another attacking midfield player and a striker, then you're starting to talk about a proper team that is able to give anyone aggravation on a good day, and also will have a little bit of strength in depth given what they've already got and what they've got coming through. So it's not impossible to conceive of United being good next season, but with owners like United have, you're never sure what's going to be.
Yeah, and the reality is that they could go and have done, could buy all of those players you've just mentioned. They may not be the right players, of course, is the thing. One of them who looks like you've mentioned him already there, Bruno Fernandes. How excited should United fans be about this guy?
Yeah, I mean, it's only been, 4 games, so there have been players who've done well after 4 games before. The one that particularly springs to mind is Angel Di Maria. But then he's frequently the person who is chastised for the fact that he was a signing that completely failed. But the reality is that Louis van Gaal lost his balls and decided that he couldn't risk playing Angel Di Maria in midfield, so started trying to play him up front and on the wing in order to hide him. And the main reason why the signing of Di Maria didn't work wasn't Di Maria himself, but it was actually Van Gaal. So I wouldn't say that is a good comparison. But what we also see with Fernandes is not just the ability, and he has a lot of ability. Aside from the fact that he's got a great eye for a pass, he can execute a pass, he's got a great engine, he's quick, and he's got an attitude where he won't take nonsense off his teammates and he won't take nonsense off himself. And all those attributes make him a really good player. So at the moment, it's kind of hard to see what his weaknesses are. He will have them, and he happens to be in great form. There will be times, presumably, when he's not in great form either. And the thing that differentiates the really high-level players from the good players is how high their bottom level is. And to go back to Roy Keane, that was why Roy Keane was so good, was that even on a bad day, he still gave you a 7 out of 10. And United don't have a lot of players like that at the moment. And if Bruno Fernandes can become one of those players, then you're talking about one of the best players around. And that is really what United need him to be.
Yeah, Ighalo shows signs as well, and very early days really for him, but showing signs of that. Obviously got his first goal last night. Don't know how he trended, Daniel, last night, if he was top of the trends on the back of that or not, but time will tell on that one. How good can he be, and when Martial is back, where does all that jigsaw fit together?
Well, I think he's just another option. When Martial's back and Martial's not being rested, he doesn't play. But what you saw from Ighalo last night was that he's a centre-forward, and Martial's not really a centre-forward. He's more of a centre-forward than he was in August. And after the other game, after the last game, I think Solskjaer said that they've been trying to train him to make centre-forwards runs, and they've been telling him over and over again what a centre-forward has to do. And you don't have to tell Ighalo that because he knows. He's just not that good a player. So he comes and shows for the ball at the right time, so he's an option for United to play into. And when the ball's going across the face of the goal, like it did last night, you know that he will be there to see if there's a tap-in. And Martial isn't that player yet. He's just a much, much more talented player than Ighalo. So I think that Ighalo was actually, in some ways, I mean, people took the piss out of United for signing Ighalo because it was a panic buy. And you would always take the piss out of that kind of thing when it's like, how on earth is this bloke just turned up at United? But in some ways, the signing made sense because they needed a striker. And they needed to not spend a lot of money on a striker who wasn't going to be that useful to them after the summer. So they found someone who knows how to play the position, who's played in the Premier League before, who they only have to have until the summer and doesn't cost them a load of money that then they're not able to spend on the player that they actually want. So although it's a bit shady that he is represented by the same bloke as Solskjaer, and he, at the end of it, is performing a function in the squad that wasn't performed before him. The one thing I'd say about Ighalo is perhaps you wouldn't necessarily want him getting minutes that should go to Mason Greenwood. But Greenwood should be getting enough minutes anyway, so that isn't too much of a problem. And on the strength of things, on sort of what we've seen so far, he actually looks like he was a smart acquisition.
Yeah, and if he continues to score goals, I suspect that United fans want to see Mason Greenwood in there. Obviously, dissipate slightly as well. There may be a bit of a luxury, obviously, the Europa League, and feel free to shoot this down, Daniel, as I'm sure you will. The Europa League is, the pressure cooker is slightly less for them. It's almost a shot to nothing in some degree, whereas obviously with the Premier League and it's Goodison Park on Sunday, they're still trying to hang on to Chelsea's coattails there. The pressure is obviously one factor that gets dialed up significantly on Sunday, which may have an impact on this evolution.
Maybe. I mean, to start with the Europa League, I'd much rather win the Europa League than come fourth, because it's a trophy. It goes on the list of trophies that you've won. It's a European trophy, and the more European trophies you win, the better. And just speaking as a supporter, I want to go to Gdansk. I want a trip to Gdansk in May to watch United pick up a pot. And the things that you remember are not remember that season we came fourth. It's remember that season we won that. And those memories are a lot of what football's about. I remember going to Vigo and to Stockholm when United won it last season, and no one who was in those places was complaining that United didn't come fourth. They were just great days and great times going to a foreign country to watch United with your mates. And that is what's going on here. And that's what I want again this season. And also, winning the Europa League the last time United won it in 2016 was set up for Mourinho, because the standard of the team was miserable. Yeah. And if Jose Mourinho can do one thing, it's pick up a trophy when the standard is miserable. Whereas this season, the standard is actually quite high. And if United are able to win a trophy against teams like Inter, like Getafe, like Leverkusen, that would actually be a pretty decent achievement. It's true that, like you say, there is less on the Europa League now because United are actually in with a pretty good chance of finishing in the top four. And you're also right that the pressure is on Everton this week, because what United have got now is they've got 3 difficult games. They've got Everton, they've got City, and they've got Spurs. And then after that, they've actually got a pretty straightforward run-in. Yeah. But they could easily lose 3 of those games, 2 of those games, and then in the run-in, they're coming from behind, and you're asking them to go on a ridiculous winning run. It might require something even close to championship form to get fourth from there if they could now go and fall 9 points behind. But if they can get a decent return from those next 3 games, then they'd be strong favourites as far as I see it to finish in the top 4, because they have by far the easiest run-in of all those teams. But they do need to start producing back-to-back quality performances. And we started to see signs of that, and they've got available the players that will hopefully enable them to do it.
Yeah, it's like that race for fourth is probably the most interesting thing that's happening in the Premier League at the minute. Arsenal, obviously one of those teams that mid-table, but really in with a strong shake of it. Everything you sort of perceive to know about Arteta's job at Arsenal at the minute is in relation almost to the mindset, right? Like changing that sort of losing or fragile culture at least. You look at last night's game, and I don't know how much of it you saw, but in extra time, Aubameyang does what he does, and you think, this actually could really turn here. I'm talking about the goal that he actually scored, and then obviously things slip away from them. There's the manner of Aubameyang's miss at the end. Like it's on small things like that changing that culture and that mindset. That like if those things had gone Arsenal's way last night, it's very easy for Arteta to go back into that dressing room last night and to go back into training this week and sort of hammer home the fact that we're now becoming like that granite rock. We are becoming this force. We're changing our culture, changing our mindset. It becomes challenging, almost more challenging after last night.
I think all of that takes time. And if you look at, instead of looking at Arsenal last night, I'd look at them over the whole period under Arteta, and they've been better. And they really just needed to get rid of Unai Emery. And getting rid of Unai Emery, he was such an innovating presence, has made a big difference. But I think the thing with Arsenal is it's a huge job. Even if they had a load of money, which they don't, it's a huge job, because ultimately there's a lot of the players aren't good enough at Arsenal. And I feel very differently about the Arsenal squad to how I felt about the United squad. I look at the United squad and I see quite a few really good players who just need a run of games and they need better players around them. Whereas if you offered me the run of the Arsenal squad and said, you can sign any of these players for the team that you support, the only players I'd really want are under 20. And they are not going to be able to define a team for you at this point, how brilliant they are. Bukayo Saka is a brilliant talent. He's a superstar. But ultimately, he's 18 years old. I really like the look of Martinelli. I really like Joe Willock. But aside from that, there's not a lot of quality in that team. And the The fullbacks are okay, but they haven't got any good centre-backs. Granit Xhaka's not good enough. Mesut Ozil's on the way down, not good enough. Alexandre Lacazette, not good enough. Nicolas Pepe, because he's new to the league, you'd give him another season, but not good enough. Him and Lacazette both scored fewer goals this season than Scott McTominay. I mean, they should be embarrassed that be the case. Scott McTominay's missed 2 months with injury. These guys are there to score goals. Aubameyang is a class act, but might leave and also is not the future. So you look around that squad and you think, Guendouzi, another one, some talent, but very high on my list of players who are nowhere near as good as they think they are.
Yeah.
These players are not going to take Arsenal to where they want to be. And Arteta somehow needs to spend the next couple of months working out who he wants to stay, who he wants to keep, who's going to be his first 11 for next season, and then he needs to be somehow finding value to use whatever limited money he's going to be given by Stan Kroenke, who likes taking money out much more than he likes putting money in, and work out the players that will elevate his team, because that is what he needs. Arsenal is a mammoth job, and they'll be better next season because Arteta seems to have some idea of what he's doing. But if I was an Arsenal fan, I would have been slightly concerned by what was said after the Everton game, when, first of all, what's his name? Bernd Leno said he was at fault for a goal that Richarlison scored. And he says that in the end, that he was unlucky, Richarlison was lucky, and it didn't matter because Arsenal won anyway. Now, that is not the mentality of a winner. A winner says, yes, it was my fault, and is obsessively thinking about what he could have done to make that better. Because ultimately it was his fault. It wasn't unlucky. Richarlison wasn't lucky. It was a balls up, and it was his fault. And also, the proper winners aren't thinking about, well, we won anyway. They're thinking we might not have won. And the pride in personal performance is such that they're obsessed about not making that mistake again. And the other thing that would concern me was Arteta said for the first 65 minutes, it was exactly the kind of performance he wants to see. And watching the game, I did not see that. So Arsenal were good for about 20 minutes, but that is it. And it was not a great performance. And on the balance of good chances, they could have lost. Then they had a good second half, and Everton's finishing was poor, so they didn't lose. But there needed to be an acknowledgement that it was a long way from a good performance, from what a good side would consider to be a good performance. And I was surprised that he was getting so rhapsodic about it. So the other thing with Arteta is that he knows what pretty football is, but does he know what a good defence is? And does he know how to coach a good defence? Does he know how to drill a good defence? Does he know how to buy good defenders? Because Pep Guardiola doesn't know that. Pep Guardiola doesn't know what a good defender is. He knows what a footballing defender is, and he knows how to drill a side's press brilliantly, and he knows how to pick the best, and he knows how to have a midfield that can keep the ball away from his defence, but he doesn't know bugger all about good defending. And that's not to criticise Pep Guardiola, who's obviously some kind of footballing savant, but he's never had a team that is good at the back. Never. He's had a team with one or two good defenders, with loads of great footballing defenders, and he's had teams that don't concede a lot of goals because he can't get the ball off them because they're brilliant, but he does not know what a good defence is. And there's no evidence that Arteta knows that either. And what he should be doing is finding someone who does know. And as it happens, I feel the same about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Does Kieran McKenna know what a good defender is, how to coach defending? I don't know. Like, if I was these people, I'd be thinking, like, if I was Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, I'd be thinking, I need to get Rio Ferdinand in to do some sessions with Eric Bailly. And if I was Mikel Arteta, I'd be thinking, who can I get in to coach my defenders to at least defend as a coherent unit? Because they do not defend like that. They didn't defend like that against Everton. They didn't defend like that last night either, because he doesn't have defenders that do that. And David Luiz is capable because he did it under Antonio Conte, who does know how to coach defenders, but he did it in a back three, and Arteta's trying to play him in a back four. So he needs... Defending is about cohesion and understanding. It's not about individuals. And Arteta needs to find a way of imposing that. And if he is not the answer to imposing that, he needs to find the person that is. If only they had a long list of former club legends who knew a thing or two about defending. We'll see how it all pans out. Daniel, thanks, William, for taking the call this morning. No, see you again.